All right, children. Today we're going to be talking about using media rhetorically. This is talking about specifically rhetoric is how you use language to be persuasive, which is part of your assignment during this documentary film project. And in this case, language includes what we see, hear, and read, but it's also but we're today I'm going to be focusing especially on what we hear, but consider that what we see and what we read could also affect our rhetoric. As always, these are required notes. Make sure that you have them. Show them to me when they're due. So the way that this can help more specifically on your final project is with the learning focus that says this: learn to appeal effectively to a specific audience by identifying and addressing stakeholders with a balanced use of ethos, pathos, and logos. So I just told you that rhetoric is speaking or writing persuasively, and it can also include what we see. You can see that on the triangle to the left. But specifically, rhetoric often references these ideas of ethos, pathos, and logos as part of how we become persuasive. So we'll come back to this triangle in a little while, but let's get into a few of the details about ethos, pathos, and logos first. So what is a rhetorical appeal? A rhetorical appeal is when a speaker or writer uses language to strengthen their argument. So they're appealing either to ethos, pathos, or logos, and each of those has a specific thing that we're looking for. So when we're looking at when we're looking at logos, so when we're appealing to logos, we're trying to persuade an audience by using logic or having some kind of logical um, underpinning to what we're saying. A lot of times, to simplify that, we say that we're going to use a logical statement, and logical statements are usually have an if and a then and a therefore. So, like if I eat lots of calories, then I will be I will be overweight. Therefore, I should not eat lots of calories is a logical statement. You're saying this is true, then this will also be true. Therefore, this is the result that I should have. And so you're always using logos, but sometimes you just say a logical statement. Ethos is when you're persuading the audience by making yourself seem credible. And there are lots of ways that you can seem credible. Sometimes you just seem credible by your tone of voice. So you say things as if you know what you're talking about, even if sometimes you don't. Sometimes you yell things, although that might take away from your credibility if you're yelling and throwing a temper tantrum. Other times it's more subtle. You rely on who you are. I say, like, from my experience, I can tell you that this thing, this thing, this thing. That's an appeal to ethos. A doctor can appeal to ethos just by the fact that they're a doctor. And so ethos is making yourself seem credible. And then lastly, pathos is trying to persuade your audience by making them feel specific emotion. Emotions are really powerful if you make people feel a specific way, especially if you make them feel good about something, you can make them want that thing, or you can convince them that, that the decision that you're trying to make them make is the right decision because they feel good about it. Negative emotions can also be used effectively if you want somebody to dislike something or to move away from something, then you make them feel bad about that thing. So obviously you use all of these things all the time, but you can break them down and think about them individually. How do I make somebody think about this logically? How do I make them think about this credibly? And how do I make them feel about this thing? Are all really important to convincing somebody that your argument is worth listening to. Here are just a couple of examples of how you could make an argument relying heavily on one of the three appeals. So if your argument was that you're trying to convince your parents to stay out late at night, and your parents are really logical people, then you could say, if I've always been responsible in the past, then you can expect me to be responsible in the future. Therefore, you should let me stay out late on Friday night. And you can really see the logic behind that. Like your parents, they're logical people, may really respond well to that. Oh yeah, it's true that you have been, and we should be able to expect that. So sure, you can stay out late on Friday night. Whereas if your parents really actually um, maybe they respond less to logos and more to authority. Not that you should have authority over your parents, but some parents might respond to a sense of authority. You could say, well, I've always followed through on my promises, and I promise to be responsible this Friday night if you let me stay out late. Otherwise, you can punish me. You're not only saying, like, look, I'm promising, you have my word, and ethos, that's your authority, right? You have my word that I'll do this thing, but you're also giving authority to your parents. And in that case, you've got basically two appeals to ethos there. And then in terms of pathos, if your parents are really emotional people, and you think that would be a good tactic to take with them, then you might make your argument sound like this. Not staying out late on Friday night would make me so angry that I would never speak to you again, and you'll regret it forever. And you're trying to basically make your parents feel guilty that they would be depriving you of this thing, and you would be depriving them of the pleasure of your company. So that's a really emotional argument. Now, the reality is that appeals are rarely used alone. Like you're rarely going to make a purely logical or a purely ethical or a purely pathological argument, but for our purposes, this could be effective. And then you want to think about it like this. So you think, well, okay, if my parents are really logical, then maybe I do want to emphasize logic a little bit more. Um, but I want to make sure that I have a little bit of authority and a little bit of emotion there too. So maybe that's how you want to think about it. So what I like to tell people is you want to balance your use of rhetoric. You don't want to overplay your hand in terms of logic or overplay your hand in terms of ethos or pathos. You want to have a good balance. You want to have one that you rely on maybe a little bit more heavily than the other two, but the other two are there to support your rhetoric. Um, so you rely most heavily on your main appeal, which is there at the top of the triangle, and then you support your main appeal by equally using the two supporting appeals. So relying on those equally as kind of the base of your main appeal. They kind of back it up, and that can lead to a well-balanced and convincing argument when you're using all three of those appeals effectively. Um, so if you want to make a mainly logical argument, you would put logos on top, but you would make sure that you're supporting your logic with a healthy dose of authority and emotion as well. So your triangle would look something like this in that case. So you'd plan to use logos more, but not to leave ethos and pathos behind. Notice that if, in this case, if the triangle were standing up, like if this was an actual physical triangle and you took pathos away from that argument, the argument would crumble, like it wouldn't be able to stand up, right? Likewise, if you were to take logos away, your argument really wouldn't have a point. It wouldn't do what it was supposed to do. So it's really important that you think to yourself, which appeal am I going to use the most? How am I going to do that? And then how am I going to then balance ethos and pathos, or balance whatever I'm using as my supports, because you can move them around. Maybe you want a really emotional argument and then you put that up top and you move logos down to a support. So there are ways also to use images and sounds persuasively. It's not just what you say. So let's go over a couple of things that might help just in terms of images and sounds. I'm also going to give you a few more pieces of advice for what to say. So for logic, for logos, if you want to emphasize your logos through images and sounds, then you're going to present data or numbers that support your ideas, because those are logical things. You're going to highlight facts and examples from your research. Those are going to be really important if you're appealing to logic. And then, of course, you want to make sure that there's a logical if then therefore flow to the ideas that you're presenting to us. If you're trying to emphasize or persuade people using ethos, then in terms of the images and sounds that you could use, then you might think about writing, practicing, and delivering your script carefully and accurately and confidently. Not stumbling over your words like I'm doing right now. Like sounding as though this is the way that it is, and I know exactly what I'm saying. Making sure that your work is neat and that you're presented neatly is going to make people trust you. Like you're planned out, you're ready to go. And then, of course, citing credible sources and their use of professional vocabulary is also important. So just people hearing you use a professional vocabulary, people seeing citations, lets them know that you have the authority to be saying what you're saying right now. And then finally, if you're going to use images and sounds to make people feel a certain way or feel your argument, then you're going to use images and music, especially that evoke emotional reactions, right? So you want to think like, how do I want my audience to feel, and can I underlie music, or can I show a picture or an image here that's going to make my audience feel that way? Make sure that you practice your lines and then invest in your topic. Get that emotion behind your voice. Deliver your lines in a way that lines up with the emotion that you want your audience to feel, and then make your audience feel as though they have a moral imperative to invest in your topic. Make it feel like it's the most important thing in the world for them to be on your side in this topic. As we're wrapping up, make sure that you do a reflection. I would recommend answering these questions. So where have you noticed these strategies being used in media that you consume? So when you watch TV or use the internet, where do you see these strategies coming into play? And then how might this also change the way that you consume media? Now that you know these things, might it have an effect on how you consume media? Make sure that you have these notes for check when they're due.